Welcome, Dr. Epic here. What we're going to discuss in this section is hunting elk, family reunions, how people can reshape a landscape, but how landscape reshapes people. What we're going to discuss in this section is cultural ecology, or in other words, human ecology. And we're going to do so using the case study of a group of Native Americans that lived along the coast of Texas, a group of people called the Karankawa. And we're going to do so following that outline right up above my yellow box. So put that in your notes so it'll serve as a framework for the notes that will follow. As we've discussed earlier, archaeology tends to do four things very well. One, it provides a chronology for the people without history. Two, it provides an objective fact to a subjective historical record. Three, it reconstructs ancient life paths, how individuals in the remote past actually interacted with their physical environment. And four, it provides a window into potential patterns of long-term human occupation and cultural variation through time. And it's the third of these that's going to concern us in this section, human ecology, also called cultural ecology. And we're going to study this. We're going to study what the Karankawa were doing on the Texas coast, how they managed to survive for thousands of years. And I'm going to give you all of the archaeological and theoretical knowledge to answer that question about the Native Americans of the Texas coast. And the question we're going to answer here is, what is human ecology? What is a seasonal round? Given the current archaeological evidence, what is the human ecology of the Karankawa? How did it shift over time, and why did it shift over time? Because those are the people we're going to study. That's the incredible pottery that unlocks how the Karankawa lived for thousands of years along the Texas coast. It's called Rockport ceramics. I'll tell you all about it later. And the theoretical tools to do so are called cultural ecology. And they were largely created by that fellow in the upper left. His name is Julian Stewart. Now, human ecology, also called cultural ecology, is the study of how humans and cultural systems adapt to their environment, both modifying and being modified by the natural landscape. It's not just like a group of people moving across the landscape using resources. They change themselves socially and culturally to adapt to the landscape. Now, this whole idea was developed out of sociology in the 1920s, but human ecology is most closely associated with Julian Stewart. That's him in the upper left. Julian Stewart, 1902 to 1972, in a series of articles and books written in the 1950s and 60s, proposed that cultural systems and social systems are shaped by adaptation to local environments. And part of cultural ecology got kind of tumbled up into the revolution of the new archaeology in the 1960s and 70s. Now, Julian Stewart used as his case study a group of Native Americans of Wyoming and Montana, a group of people called the Shoshone, and that's them in the upper left. And in studying the Shoshone, Julian Stewart basically argued three things in terms of how the environment has changed the Shoshone society and how the Shoshone have changed the environment. He argued three things: that in environments with, one, limited and scattered resources, two, a principal reliance on game, which required collective action to hunt. That means if you're like hunting elk and you're hunting deer, you can't do it on your own. You've got to go out with like 10 other guys to do it. And three, in this area of Wyoming and Montana, the game animals that existed, they exist in these small non-migratory herds. That means like elk or deer or maybe antelope, not these big like migratory caribou herds or buffalo herds. And that basically, if you meet all three criteria, that these type of environments tend to produce conditions that are really only going to support small band of hunter-gatherers. It's not going to support these massive groups of buffalo hunters or these massive groups of farmers. That in the environment of Wyoming and Montana, that the environment itself is going to strongly favor very small groups of hunter-gatherers, groups of people just like the Shoshone. And furthermore, because hunting these game animals requires cooperation between small groups of men, such conditions are going to strongly favor, now they're going to place this strong cultural emphasis on patrilineal associations, which is to say, counting descent and ancestry along the male line. If the survivability of your entire group depends on the close cooperation between men, then men are going to develop very, very close friendships. And it's going to behoove your society, it's going to behoove your culture to strengthen the alliance between these men. Thus, the strategy in adapting to this kind of hard environment of Wyoming and Montana favors one very specific manner of social and kin-based organization. In this case, local hunting conditions are strongly favoring small groups of men working together and creating a strongly male-oriented society. Now, the Shoshone were mobile hunter-gatherers who had figured out basically when various resource patches become available when they move from mountain to valley in Wyoming and Montana. So there's a map on the left, and you can see, you can track the little arrows, that the different groups of Shoshone are moving from the high mountains to the valley bottom in very predictable seasonal patterns. So throughout the year, the Shoshone are moving from resource patch to resource patch as the plants and animals become available at different times at different places throughout the year. So they move from A to B, from B to C, and from C back to A. And they do so in a cycle, in a round. Hunter-gatherers are not just moving across the landscape, kind of opportunistically eating or trapping anything they find, but rather they are moving in highly predictable patterns from resource patch to resource patch throughout the year in what is effectively a circle, a seasonal round. Write that down. It's in all caps. It's important. Seasonal round. This movement isn't random, but is in fact highly patterned. And basically for the Shoshone, it works like this. From late spring to the beginning of autumn, the Shoshone move in small family groups. So basically groups of about a dozen people are moving along the bottoms of the valley floors. They're harvesting fruits, they're harvesting nuts, they're hunting rabbit, deer, and antelope. And one of the things they're doing is they're smoking meat and they're storing up large amounts of meat because they know that winter is coming. In the late autumn, they move from the valley floors into the mountains to harvest newly available pine nuts and tubers. Then these small groups congregate in these big family reunions into large winter camps in the mountains. And then they live off of the food that they've slowly been storing throughout the year. And then when spring comes, the whole cycle starts all over again. So late spring and autumn, they're in small family groups on the valley floor. Then in the late autumn, they move into the mountains and then gather pine nuts and tubers. And they're carrying large supplies of meat this whole time. And then when winter comes, the small groups gather together into a big family reunion where they all share a single winter store. And then they basically spend the hardest winter months living off of all of this stored food. And then when the snow melts, they break up into small family groups again and spread out across the valley floors. So in other words, getting through these hard winters depends on being able to successfully hunt throughout the summer and the fall. This is why this heavy reliance on male cooperation. And that forms a circle from the valley floor to the mountains to the winter camp and then back to the valley floor. From small groups on the valley floor to family groups up in the mountains to a big family reunion in your winter camp, and then everything breaks up all over again. Highly patterned. The Shoshone don't need a map. They have a mental map. They know what parts of the valley, they know what parts of Montana are going to be fruitful at different parts of the year. And they move in this highly organized, highly patterned seasonal round. So getting through the winter is going to rely heavily on hunting. Hunting these animals relies heavily on male cooperation. The better the cooperation, the better the hunting, the more successful food is collected, the better the chance that the food that those men hunt are going to get you through the winter. All right? So everything stresses male cooperation. Adaptation to the environment reinforced the status of men and the solidarity of male hunting bands. For the Shoshone, male relationships, cooperation between men means everything. Men rule. This is a highly patriarchal society. In fact, the bonds between men are much, much closer than the bonds between men and women. In fact, I read a story once that a Shoshone man will tell you all about his hunting buddy and might not even know the names of his daughters. males have much closer bonds between each other than they do with their wives or their daughters or their mothers. Adaptation to the environment changed the social structure of the society. Adaptation to the environment shapes the culture, i.e., cultural ecology, human ecology. Now, this was a major theoretical breakthrough. This is a really, really brilliant series of ideas. And people tended to use it. In fact, people tended to overuse it. And there are problems with human ecology. Over time, it tends to degenerate into a crude kind of environmental determinism. And environmental determinism is this kind of simplistic idea that human cultural systems are determined by their environment. This is most clearly seen in the works of Jared Diamond, who claims he's not an environmental determinist, but she don't protest too much. Jared Diamond is clearly an environmental determinist. And even Lou Benford, to some extent, was kind of a softer version of environmental determinism. This idea that human cultural systems are determined wholly by their environment. And it's this idea that environment A will always produce society type B, and then you're trying to elevate that like people did into some sort of general covering laws. It doesn't always work like that. But it is incontrovertible that as humans reshape a landscape, the landscape reshapes human society, and people will adapt their society to make maximum use of the environments around them. And this is true not just of hunter-gatherer societies. This is also true of very, very complex societies, where the modification of the landscape is much more evident. Complex societies are those capable of dramatically reshaping entire landscapes to meet their cultural need. And they did so. If you look on the left, the Romans redirected entire rivers. They would dam up rivers, create these reservoirs, carve a channel through the mountains, and produce miles and miles of aqueducts to deliver water to their fields, to deliver water to their cities, rerouting entire rivers to serve their needs. The people of Highland Guatemala and the people of Highland South America would basically recarve the side of mountains to look like basically staircases, except they're not staircases for giants. Those are turning the sides of mountains into arable fields. So you're not limited to farming on the valley floor. You can actually farm the very sides of the mountains themselves. But it should be remembered that all human societies modify their landscape. There has never existed a human society that has zero impact on a landscape. Even in hunting elk or even in hunting deer, you are applying predatory pressures to those animal populations. All human societies modify the landscape they inhabit. The difference is merely the scale and visibility of such modification. Now, when we get to discussing classic Maya civilization, one of the most complex Native American societies that ever existed, this is going to be an especially important point, because the Maya inhabited one of the most delicate environments, that you could conceive of, a tropical rainforest, multi-canopied, delicate, notorious for bad soil conditions, notorious for dense wildlife, dense foliage, and unforgiving soil conditions. Yet the classic Maya dramatically reshaped their landscape. You can see the remains of terraced fields right up above me, these carved, cut little gardens, draining swamps, turning swamps into arable cornfields. You can see there on the upper left the remains of huge roads that they would cut, some of which are dozens of miles long, huge raised causeways that would stretch across the Maya world. And you can see right there highly advanced hydraulic engineering as the Maya turned their entire cities into drainage systems to collect rainfall during one part of the year to use it in another. So we're really looking at the environmental balance that human societies strike with their society. We're looking at the environmental balance that was struck by two ancient societies. We're going to do so through the Karankawa, which is what we're going to do first, and then we're going to move on to the Maya. Each of the societies, the Karankawa of coastal Texas, the ancient Maya of Central America, in their own way, managed a sustainable approach to their environment, a sustainable approach that worked for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But it didn't work forever. In both of these cases, in both coastal Texas and Central America, something happened. This sustainable relationship with the environment, this environmental balance that they painstakingly built over the course of generations, broke. All right? Something upset the ecological balance that both societies had achieved, tipped the society, and both societies ultimately collapsed in the face of these novel challenges. But that's what we're going to address next time as we work towards answering this question right there. What is human ecology? What is the seasonal round? Given the current archaeological evidence, what is the human ecology of the Karankawa? How did it shift over time? And why did it shift over the time? Put that question in your notes, and we're going to address it in the next section. And I will see you there.